than 1400 years ago, a single chapter in the Quran spoke of an empire called Rum that had suffered a crushing defeat and then promised it would rise again. That empire was none other than Byzantium, the eastern heir of ancient Rome, whose marble walls and golden domes seemed unshakable. To hear that such a mighty power would first fall and then recover so quickly must have sounded like a miracle to the early believers in Arabia. What if those words still carry a spark of divine inspiration today? Picture a caravan winding its way across desert sands as merchants eagerly share news of a Persian army's triumph over the Romans. Imagine believers in Mecca huddled around travelers fresh from distant lands, their hearts heavy with stories of war and loss. Into that tense silence comes a revelation. Rum will be defeated, but soon it will stand victorious once more. In that moment, despair turns to hope, and the promise of recovery becomes a sign that no hardship is permanent. Now, fast forward to our age, where world powers rise and fall in the headlines of every news cycle. Could this ancient prophecy still offer a window into the fate of nations, the ebb and flow of history, or even the struggles within our own lives? As we explore Islam's battle for Rome, we'll discover how a promise made in 7th century Arabia continues to resonate in military sieges, cultural exchanges, and the dreams of people longing for justice and renewal. Throughout history, faith communities have turned to sacred texts for guidance in times of crisis. For early Muslims, the promise regarding Rum provided more than abstract wisdom. It offered concrete reassurance that an empire thought invincible could falter, and that victory could follow defeat in surprisingly short order. This prophecy bridged the gap between spiritual conviction and political reality, reminding believers that divine will shapes the destinies of nations. At the heart of this story lies the Byzantine state, often called the Eastern Roman Empire. Centered on its glorious capital of Constantinople, it stretched from the Balkans to Syria, from the Black Sea to Egypt. Its armies marched beneath banners bearing crosses, and its leaders governed vast populations of Christians, Jews, and pagans. Few powers in the world seemed more secure, yet history has shown that even the grandest kingdoms can crumble. In the Quran's chapter 30, named Aram, or the Romans, we find verses that speak directly to believers. The Romans have been defeated in the nearest land. Yet, after their defeat, they will overcome within a few years. To God belongs the command before and after. And on that day the believers will rejoice. These lines arrived around 620 CE, when Muslims faced their own trials under Meccan persecution. Hearing of Rome's fall and its promise of resurgence gave fresh courage to a community under pressure. From that moment, scholars and storytellers wove the prophecy into sermons, poetry, and treatises. It became a touchstone for interpreting events, for understanding how God's justice unfolds across human affairs. Even when the immediate context faded, the prophecy endured in the hearts of believers as a symbol of resilience. Today, we will trace its journey from desert revelation to modern debates, unraveling the layers of history, theology, and meaning that surround Islam's battle for Rome. Yet, interpreting a prophecy from the 7th century poses real challenges. On the one hand, many historians point to the Persian-Byzantine Wars of the early 600 CE as the clear backdrop. In 614 CE, Persian forces captured Jerusalem and dealt heavy blows to Byzantine armies. Not long after, Emperor Heraclius turned the tide, reclaiming territory by 628 CE. In this reading, the Quranic promise found swift fulfillment within a decade. On the other hand, some readers see a double meaning, a near-term fulfillment alongside a longer-term or even future realization. Reports in the Hadith literature speak not just of Byzantium's recovery, but of Muslims one day marching on the very hills of Rome. Because no such siege in modern Italy has occurred, this part of the prophecy fuels debate. Is it a literal prediction still awaiting its moment, or a metaphor for spiritual conquest through knowledge, justice, and cultural influence? Overlaying these questions is our modern geopolitical landscape. Today's Rome might be symbolized by the European Union, the Vatican, or even Western power broadly. How do we map ancient terms onto 21st century realities without stretching texts beyond their intent? As divisions deepen, some groups have twisted the prophecy to justify violence, while others stress its message of hope and divine timing. Navigating these interpretations without losing sight of history or slipping into political agendas remains a central challenge. How then can we honor the original context of the revelation, appreciate its echoes in later centuries, and still draw meaningful lessons for our world today? To answer that, we must dive into the sources, the events they describe, and the ways people across time have understood, sometimes embraced, sometimes rejected, the promise of Islam's battle for Rome. The Arabic word Rum appears frequently in early Muslim texts. Far from referring to wine, it denoted the Eastern Roman Empire, the continuation of Constantine's legacy in the Near East. At the time of Islam's rise, Byzantium safeguarded Europe's eastern frontier, the gateway between Asia and Europe. Its navy patrolled the Mediterranean, and its diplomats negotiated alliances from Ctesiphon to Constantinople. In the late 610s CE, news reached Medina and Mecca that the Persians had struck a decisive blow. The city of Jerusalem fell, the true cross was carried off, and Byzantine legions reeled under assaults along the Euphrates. This was the defeat in a nearby land mentioned in the Quran. For believers facing marginalization, the idea that the Empire of Rome could suffer such a shock must have seemed a powerful sign. Within just a few years, the tables turned dramatically. Emperor Heraclius launched an audacious campaign in 622 CE, weaving through mountain passes and river valleys to strike deep into Persian territory. By 628 CE, he had reclaimed Jerusalem and even marched on Ctesiphon, scoring a symbolic victory that restored Roman honor. Those events align neatly with the promise that Rome would overcome within a few years, confirming to many that the verse spoke of a past struggle rather than deferred events. Beyond the Quran, Muslim scholars turn to hadith collections for further detail. A well-known report, recorded by Abu Dawood and Ibn Majah, proclaims, "You will conquer Constantinople. What a wonderful leader her leader will be, and what a wonderful army her army will be." Centuries later, that saying took on new life when Sultan Mehmed II assembled his forces for the siege of Constantinople in 1453. The fall of Constantinople proved momentous. Mehmed's army applied massive cannons, some so large they had to be moved on rollers by hundreds of men. For 53 days, the city's walls, built and reinforced since Roman times, held fast. Then, on May 29, a breach in the Theodosian walls allowed Ottoman troops to pour in. The Hagia Sophia was converted into a mosque, and Constantinople, renamed Istanbul, became the jewel of a new empire that blended Turkish, Arab, Persian, and Byzantine traditions. Many Muslims heralded this victory as the Hadith's fulfillment. Poets composed odes, coins bore Mehmed's image, and scholars wrote commentaries linking his conquest to divine promise. Still, one cannot ignore that the Western Church continued. The papacy endured in Rome, and Europe pressed on into the Renaissance. Constantinople's fall marked a shift in power, but it did not bring a direct march on the city of Rome itself. That gap between prophecy and record gives rise to a second hadith, found in some collections, which describes Muslims standing on the Hill of Rome. Interpretations vary. Some see a literal future event, an encore to Mehmed's triumph, yet aimed at Italy's heart. Others suggest a symbolic conquest. The spread of Muslim scholarship in medicine, mathematics, and philosophy into Europe during the Middle Ages, which helped ignite the very Renaissance that reshaped Western thought. In this light, the hill may stand for intellectual high ground, not a physical hilltop. In recent decades, extremist groups have seized on the more militant renditions of these prophecies. One such group even named its flagship magazine Dabiq, after a Syrian town linked to a hadith about a final battle with Romans. They claimed their actions fulfilled ancient promises, urging followers to march toward Rome as a global objective. Mainstream Muslim leaders, both scholars and community figures, have denounced this misuse of scripture as a distortion that ignores the prophecy's original spirit of hope and renewal. Today's most respected voices stress context over spectacle. They remind believers that the Quranic verses first offered comfort to a persecuted minority, that the hadith about Constantinople reflected a centuries-long spiritual aspiration rather than a call for unending warfare, and that the Hill of Rome can inspire peaceful contributions to global knowledge and justice. Under this view, Islam's battle for Rome becomes an inward battle for patience, perseverance, and compassion in the face of adversity. Imagine again the plain of Dabiq, where one hadith places the climactic showdown between believers and Romans. Under a ruthless sun, armies arrayed tribes and banners in neat rows. Tension crackles in the air as both sides prepare for the clash. In that instant, faith and steel converge. Soldiers pray for divine support, even as they ready their shields and spears. The hadith suggests victory for the faithful, a turning point that carries more than military significance. That vision of triumph taps into something universal, our need for assurance when circumstances overwhelm us. No matter how dire the situation, the bold stand of believers on that plain echoes through time, offering a model of courage under pressure. Whether the scene unfolds on Syrian soil, in the corridors of power in Byzantium, or in the inner chambers of our personal struggles, the message is the same. Steadfastness today can become triumph tomorrow. As historians sift through dates and numbers, and as theologians weigh chains of narration, the core image remains vivid. Loss may come swiftly, but recovery can arrive just as fast. A community beset by hardship can find renewal. An empire that seems destined for oblivion can spring back to greatness. Those possibilities lie at the heart of the prophecy, an enduring reminder that defeat is never the end of the story. We began with a revelation that spoke of Byzantium's fall and rise, a verse that brought solace to early Muslims facing persecution. We traced that promise through the Persian-Byzantine Wars, saw its echo in Mehmed II's conquest of Constantinople, and explored the tantalizing hints of a march on the hill of Rome. On the way, we met scholars who argued for literal fulfillment, poets who celebrated victory, and communities who found hope in every line. We also confronted the darker side of prophecy, its misuse by those who cloak political ambition in sacred words, and the need to guard against distortions that fuel division. By returning to the original context, comfort for the oppressed, trust in divine timing, faith that justice emerges from struggle, we recover the balanced understanding that guided believers for centuries. Whether we view the battle for Rome as history fulfilled, a metaphor for intellectual triumph, or a promise yet to come, its core message remains clear. Adversity can give way to victory, and no empire stands beyond the reach of change. In that truth, believers of every time and place find encouragement to persevere, to build bridges across cultures, and to strive for justice in a world that sorely needs it. What do you make of this ancient promise? Have you seen its impact in history, in modern events, or in your own life's trials and triumphs? Share your thoughts below, and let's discuss how a prophecy from the desert still speaks to our shared human journey.